We're back. And being joined now, as I said before we left, Lynn Moore, a lawyer working here in St. John's and involved with the walk that's being planned for next summer. Now, I have to say, I just used the word walk rather than the full title because we received a call during the break from someone who requested that we try not to use it. She finds it offensive and says she has kids in her house that are confused by the term, whether or not it's okay, what it means. Some find it funny, some find it disturbing. How do you respond to that?
Well, I respond to that by saying that I want people to feel uncomfortable when they're talking about sexual violence, and I want people to think about that word, and I want people to think about when that word is used and how it's used. And, I myself had that word used against me when I was 16 years old, and I was working in McDonald's, and it was a manager who didn't particularly like me, and I was deeply affected by it, deeply wounded by it, and all I could think was, you don't know me. The only thing you know about me is that I'm not particularly good at working at McDonald's. And it's a word that has a lot of power, and it's a word that has a lot of hate. And if we didn't use that word, if we used another word to describe it, it wouldn't have the effect that it's having. You and I wouldn't be having this conversation now. I had a conversation with my husband's aunt, who's 78 years old, when I first posted on Facebook that I was helping to organize this walk. And she said to me, "Who are the sluts?" And I said, well, that's a really good question, because who are they? Is it, I participated in a case. I was doing a case involving a sexual assault when I was a Crown attorney, and I was doing research on cases, and I found a judge who was giving a sentencing decision and said that the 3-year-old in that case was unusually promiscuous. And I think that the types of questions that Heather was talking to you about yesterday that get asked of survivors of sexual assault, things like what were you wearing, have you had any other sexual partners, things like that, they dehumanize people, and we're using the word because it's effective and it's getting people talking about it. And the big message is that it is never okay to blame survivors of sexual assault for being assaulted. It's the people who do the assaulting that need to be blamed.
Well, I take the value of that part of it, but are you worried about desensitizing the term so that it no longer has any meaning, or is that the point?
That is the point. I use that word, and I think by using it the way that I do, I use it to describe myself now, because I'm sick of that word being used to make people feel badly, so I'm using it for that reason. But I'm really happy that it's starting conversations, and I think it's really interesting how we talk about sexual violence and how we don't talk about sexual violence. And I was listening in part to what you and Heather were talking about yesterday, and the whole question of neutrality. And I was thinking about the gang rapes that the sex workers have complained of. And I was thinking, when I hear about a break and enter on the news, or when I hear about an armed robbery, I don't hear the media reporting it as an alleged armed robbery or an alleged break and enter. I hear that there was a break and enter. I hear that there was an armed robbery. It's only when we talk about sexual crimes that they suddenly become alleged. And I realize that there's a presumption of innocence and there's a requirement for proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and that news media have to be concerned about defamation and libel, and that when a person is actually named as a suspect or an accused person, then those presumptions of innocence come to the fore. But when we're talking about the issue generally, I think that we are even more careful about our language and the use of the word alleged and allegations and that kind of thing. I think that we use those words a lot when we're talking about sexual violence, because we are mistrustful that sexual violence happens, and everyone seems to accept that 1 in 4 women or girls is sexually assaulted, and it's not just women. It's 1 in 6 boys or men are sexually assaulted, and I think it's something so horrible that we don't want to believe that it's happening, but it is happening.
Yeah, I think in the case of robberies and whatnot, there is some evidence that a break-in occurred. Anything beyond that, who was responsible or whatnot, is usually alleged. I took issue with Heather.
What evidence is there that there's been a break-in? I mean, I could. Well,
the door is smashed and there's material missing.
I could do that. I could do that to my house. I could hide stuff in my house.
Well, to say that there's a break-in doesn't preclude that it was done by the owner, but that still doesn't mean that a crime, or at least the evidence of a crime, doesn't exist.
Well, there's evidence. Evidence. There's two types of evidence. There's circumstantial evidence, and there's viva voce evidence from people. Mm-hmm. And there are certain crimes that do not lend themselves to circumstantial evidence. And there's been a lot of talk about how circumstantial evidence is, not great evidence, and juries should be careful about convicting on just circumstantial evidence. But it's the level of suspicion and the suspect nature of people who make complaints of sexual assault is not the same as when people make complaints of other kinds of crime. Any kind of crime can be fabricated. You can say that I was defrauded of money, and you can show money going out of your account, and you can do that.
Which is why we have to be extra careful, though, right? I mean, she was taking issue with me using the term alleged, assuming she was suggesting that I automatically believe anybody who's alleging that something happened, which it clearly is not the way we can go.
But you don't say alleged armed robbery.
We say the alleged perpetrator of the armed robbery.
Yeah, but when we're talking in particular about the sex workers, there's no one been named. There's no one been suggested that they've done it, but we're still suspect.
But are you suggesting it's beyond the possibility that somebody could concoct a story for a different reason, and that we should automatically believe any claim that's made before any evidence or investigation has been conducted?
So, there are different circumstances in which people disclose that they have been sexually assaulted. So if a person goes to the police and say, I've been sexually assaulted, then it's the police officer's job to investigate that.
Absolutely.
It's the police officer's job to be suspicious of that, to look for corroboration, to see, is there other evidence which could corroborate this? Is there enough evidence? And then when it goes to court, it's the judge's job to determine if there's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But I think what Heather was saying to you is that if someone comes to you and says, this happened to me, and you're not a police officer, then the human thing to do is to say, I believe you.
I don't think that's what she was saying to me, no.
Well, that's what I was hearing. And you guys weren't really agreeing, and you were talking over one another a little bit. So
I think I made it fairly clear that I was talking about the presumption of innocence until proven guilty, and she was suggesting that perhaps in certain cases we should presume guilt until innocence is presume guilt until innocence is presumed. That's pretty much how that went. I'd love to go back and listen to the tape with you and with anyone who wants to hear it, but I was pretty certain that we were clear about what each of us was saying.
Well, it's interesting because I had an argument with a person that I'm very close with in my life about the whole Gian Gomeshi thing, and this person was saying to me, it can't be trialed by Twitter, it can't be trialed by Facebook, and I was saying, well, they're actually, Facebook and Twitter do not have the capacity to hold trials. They are forums for discussion, and I think that perhaps you and Heather were not understanding one another about what context you were talking about. But for my purpose, what I'm hoping that people get out of this walk is that it is not okay to blame victims or survivors. It is not okay to suggest that the way somebody dresses is responsible for the sexual violence perpetrated upon them.
And if some people or a lot of people are reluctant to be associated with it because of some perceived implication they have, what it says about them, then that's fair enough, and you don't mind losing those people or, I guess, dampening the impact of this because of that.
Well, I think Heather said yesterday that it's happened in over 200 cities across the world, and I don't think that if it was called Consent Fest that it would have had that kind of attention. So I'm sorry if people are offended by it, but I'm angry about the way survivors of sexual assault are treated, and that the name of the walk, I think, demonstrates that anger that a lot of survivors of sexual violence feel in the way that they're treated when they come forward with what's happened to them.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that people get it and there's consensus on the anger and the reasons for it. It's I guess comes down to differing opinions on what might be the most effective form of a protest to do the most good. But in any case, listen, I appreciate your time. If you have anything else to say...
And I appreciate yours, and thank you for bringing it up. And I just want to say one last thing.
Sure.
If you Google the word slut, Slutwalk comes up.
Okay.
So it's having an effect. It's making people talk.
I thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay. Lynn Moore, lawyer in town, working with Heather Jarvis, the co-founder of the Slutwalk. I'll say it that one time. And there's going to be one here in this city in the summer of 2015.